today's show, we are going to be breaking down the Ottawa Senators 2024 draft haul as well as their prospect pool as a whole.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Today, we'll be breaking down the Ottawa Senators prospect pool as well as their 2024 draft haul. I'm Sebastian High, the Director of European Scouting over at Dobber Prospects, still here on the solo episode grind with my poor co-host still down with COVID and the aftermath of that. But we are going to still have a good time breaking down this Ottawa prospect pool today. Before we jump into the show, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in free bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So the Ottawa Senators have a very fascinating history in terms of drafting and developing prospects. They've taken some pretty divisive swings in recent drafts, whether it be Tyler Boucher or right now in this class, Carter Yakemchuk at 7th overall. And there's been a very clear tendency to favor players that have a high degree of raw physical tools without perhaps a strong underlying foundation of habits and overall polish in their game when they're being drafted, which can turn into absolute massive home run swings. We saw that with Tim Stützle in that draft class. It was him and Quinton Byfield that led the pack by a strong margin in 2019 or 2020 in terms of raw physical tools and the upside that they brought. And that has been working out really nicely with Stützle in Ottawa. While he didn't quite hit the point of game mark this past season, he was a 90-plus point player the year before, and he seems to be the guy moving forward for the Senators in terms of producing consistent offense and adding a dynamic flair to the equation. But this 2024 draft class was also very interesting for similar reasons. As I said, at 7th overall, they went with the big 6'3" right shot defenseman in Carter Yakemchuk, a pretty divisive prospect this season, due to the divergence between the elite level physical tools, whether it be unbridled aggression, elite level handling ability, an absolute bomb of a shot in the offensive zone, with the lack of refinement in his habits and his reads. His aggression can often get the best out of him, and while he is at his best, while aggressive, he brings that dial pretty far oftentimes, getting way out of position in terms of chasing a hit on the defensive side of things, or in his on-puck aggression of just trying to solve complex problems by just improvising and handling around every issue when it comes his way. And even though it is a junior league in the WHL, and it did succeed at times, it was just far from a high percentage type of play to make, and he was making it repeatedly. So while he is very flashy, very entertaining, very dynamic with the puck on his stick, there's also a lot of turnovers and a lot of unforced errors that he kind of skates his way into. In terms of the physical tools, there's still a couple things that he needs to refine, namely the skating. He still has a pretty choppy stride, and correcting that a little bit should help him in terms of mitigating errors after they are made as well in order to recover from them. But overall, a very interesting selection. This is a pure offensive defenseman with really high-end offensive upside. He scored 30 goals in the WHL as a defenseman in 66 games with the Calgary Hitmen, and he also added 41 assists for 71 points. The offensive ceiling is really interesting here, and if everything turns out well, Yakemchuk could turn into a Brent Burns style of player, a guy who brings that physicality, that aggression, but also that high degree of offensive upside, a really big shooting threat, as well as a handling threat to open up passing lanes for himself. And I'm very curious to track his development over the coming seasons, because he is one of those players that was a bit lower on my personal board. I believe he ended up around 16th or 17th on my list, because I still have some some doubts of how he translates to the professional game, let alone to the NHL. But if he hits his upside, he will be one of the more entertaining blue liners in the entire NHL, but he will need some real hands-on development work and guidance in his development path. So I'm curious to see how Ottawa is going to be able to support him through that process. With their second round draft pick, Ottawa ended up selecting Gabriel Eliasson, a 6'7", 207-pound left shot defenseman who skates really well. Those are raw tools that you really want to add to your organization, and I understand that drive, but they also represent the bulk of what makes Eliasson a credible NHL level prospect. It is that physicality, it is the range, it is the mobility. Beyond that, there's only question marks in my eyes. The decision making that supports this game has been floundering oftentimes in my viewings. He's really struggled under pressure, whether it be defensively or with the puck on his stick. He lacks that composure on puck. He struggles to make an accurate first pass when there's any degree of pressure. The offensive involvement's quite low. The transition struggles are massive. And he's going to need a lot of time to develop if the Sens want to get a sturdy NHL player out of him. And while this isn't a swing I personally would have made in the first 4 rounds of the draft class, I'm not shocked that Ottawa was the team that ended up making it. And again, if he turns out there is second pairing upside in this player, a bit like with Yakemchuk, where there is first pairing upside. The upside isn't what is questioned. It is the foundation that supports that game and just how doubtful it can be so often. That said, Eliasson is also still very young for the draft class, whereas Yakemchuk's on the older side. And maybe this upcoming season could see a really big leap in his development. But I share a lot of the same concerns that saw Eliasson struggle to get any type of minutes at the U18 World Championships with that team Sweden, where by the end of the tournament, he was playing a shift or two every game. And those shifts were often some of the more struggling shifts in the defensive zone for Sweden as a whole in those games. And struggling against his own age group at that level of play is a level of concern, and he's far from the most refined or best player at this stage in his development, but the Senators will be hoping that he can develop and really polish a lot of those rough edges that remain in his game and can continue layering more skills and more deception and more overall supporting tools into his massive, rangy, mobile frame. Their next pick of the draft was Lucas Elinas, a 6'2", 198-pound center / left wing, who is not a player that I watched particularly often in the past draft class. But that said, the Senators clearly believe in this guy's profile. And as I mentioned, he was a 4th-round draft pick here. And this past season, he was playing with the Kitchener Rangers in the OHL, where he logged 16 goals and 17 assists for 33 points before improving upon that with 8 points through 10 playoff games, including 5 goals. There's a couple standout elements in his game, including really quick release wrist shot, and he's a pretty confident puck handler. But clearly, they're just going to be hoping for him to build off of this past season and become a more impactful player at the OHL level. The next 2 picks, however, were ones I really, really liked for the Sens. First off, we've got Javon Moore, a 6'4", 200-plus-pound left winger who's incredibly raw, but so very toolsy. He's powerful, he's mobile, he's skilled with a puck on his stick. He's playing high school level hockey this past season with Minnetonka in the Minnesota high school circuit, but will be making the leap to the NCAA this upcoming season. He's going to really need a lot of time to develop, but the upside could be as high as inside a top 6 at the end of the day. I would very much like any team to pick him in the top 2 rounds of the draft. I think he had that level of value and upside in his game, even though there is a good amount of risk in taking the swing. But where they took the swing, I think it is fantastic value. And I think that Sens fans are going to be very happy about having this player in their system. Beyond just bringing the offensive upside, he also has that physicality, the big frame, these elements that the Sens really value in the players that they're adding into their organization. The next guy's a little bit along the same lines in Blake Montgomery. He wasn't playing in the high school circuit this past season, but rather in the USHL. And he's also a 6'4", 181-pound left winger, still growing and filling out his big frame. But there's a really impressive level of skill and intelligence that underpins everything he does on the ice. And I think this pick could also end up being a steal in no time at all. The last pick of the draft was Eric Valenius, a pretty big 6'4", 212-pound left shot defenseman who, as an 06 birthday in this draft class, has a decent amount of overall physical tools with that size, the coveted size. And he also combines that with a desire to have the puck on his stick, and he likes to control the game and control the pace of play in the breakout. This past season, he was playing in the U18 and U20 leagues over in Finland. In the U18 circuit, he played 14 games, scoring 3 goals and 8 points. And at the U18 level, he played 37 games, including 3 goals and 14 points. And that is the overall draft class and the draft haul for the Ottawa Senators in this 2024 draft class in Vegas. And I think it overall deserves a B- grade. There's a decent amount of upside in the players that were added into the fold here, whether it be Carter Yakemchuk in the first round or some really smart depth selections with Javon Moore and Blake Montgomery. I still have a lot of questions around Gabriel Eliasson, but if he's able to round out his game and end up as a supportive piece on a second pairing, you're getting a really unique type of second pairing defenseman who's able to layer unbridled aggression, violence, and a massive frame and mobility. So a very interesting overall approach to the draft. No player that was selected here is under 6'2" or under 181 pounds. There's a clear preference here for the big boys in terms of adding players into the fold. And while I do still have questions, and I wouldn't have picked these specific players in these slots myself, I'm curious to see how this draft class is able to evolve and which players end up being able to make the leap to the AHL and the NHL subsequently. But that wraps up this first segment for us here at Locked On NHL Prospects, and we'll continue over in the second segment breaking down the overall prospect pool of this organization. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. I love sports. I love them so much that I just never want them to stop, which makes the offseason especially difficult. With the NHL playoffs having wrapped up, the NHL draft behind us, even the Euros and Copa America now in the rear view, we're down to just a couple more sports that are still going on at the moment, including Major League Baseball. With FanDuel, I'm still able to get in on the action with whatever sports are still ongoing. And all I have to do is open up the safe and secure app and dream up bets anytime I want to. And this summer, FanDuel is giving all customers a boost or a bonus while logging in every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone daily, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Alrighty, let's keep this episode going here by breaking down the Ottawa Senators prospect pool. A lot of the young players in this organization have already made the leap to the NHL and won't be included in this breakdown, whether it be elite level defensive talents like Jake Sanderson or emerging gritty middle six pieces on the forward line in guys like Shane Pinto and Ridley Gregg. That said, there's still a decent amount of interesting pieces here, especially on the blue line. But let's start off by breaking down the forward prospect pool, including 2 players that the Sens recently acquired by a trade with the Edmonton Oilers. And that starts off here with Xavier Bourgault, the highly touted Quebecois scoring forward, is a guy who was so highly touted that he was a really clear first-round pick back in 2021, being picked 22nd overall by the Edmonton Oilers, slightly controversially as they ended up passing on Jesper Wallstedt in order to do so, and or trading down out of a slot where they could have picked Wallstedt. And goaltending has always been a bit of a theme over in Edmonton, but clearly they liked Bourgault enough to take that risk on him, and his draft year production was fantastic. In just 29 games played that season, he scored 20 goals and 40 points. He has a wicked shot, a really good goal scorer. He's intelligent off puck. He finds soft ice, and he has a lot of skill with the puck on his stick as well. While the playmaking game still has yet to quite catch up to the goal-scoring acumen, there's a real level of skill that underpins his entire game. That said, the leap to professional hockey has been a bit difficult for him. He's now spent 2 seasons in the AHL with the Bakersfield Condors, and in 62 games in his rookie year, he scored 13 goals and 34 points. And then in 55 games this past season, he scored 8 goals and 20 points. So a pretty sharp decline in production and a stagnation in his development. The Sens will be hoping to foster his offensive talent by giving him big minutes over in the AHL. And I'm very curious to see if he's able to resuscitate his offensive career in a way and perhaps make that leap to the NHL in a year or two to become a middle six scorer, which is his upside, but the chances of him hitting that are dwindling at the moment. But hopefully this trade is the exact thing that can spark his development to take a turn upwards. Another player they acquired in this trade was Jake Chiasson, a former WHL scorer who was selected in the same draft in 2021 in the 4th round by the Oilers. And in his final year in the WHL in 2022-2023, he played 70 games where he scored 20 goals and 58 points, split between the Brandon Wheat Kings and the Saskatoon Blades, before making the leap to the AHL and mainly the ECHL. He played a single AHL game this past season with Bakersfield, but was mainly playing with the Fort Wayne Comets in the ECHL, logging 9 goals, 20 points in 68 games. While he's a lot further away from the NHL than a guy like Xavier Bourgault might be, there's still a level of skill in his game that I still think could elevate him to a depth skill role, like on a 4th line if he ends up cracking the NHL, but the overall likelihood of him hitting that isn't the highest in the world. Beyond him, you have a couple other players that we have already mentioned so far today, like Blake Montgomery and Javon Moore, the big, raw, physical forwards that are heading over to the NCAA to pursue their development, as well as Stephen Halliday, an interesting, also very big draft selection from 2 years ago by the Senators, who's been chugging along in his development and has just played 2 seasons at the NCAA level, scoring a lot of points, and is now making the leap to the AHL. The last player I wanted to mention in terms of the forwards is a big name in Tyler Boucher, a player that has been very controversial in terms of having been picked 10th overall against all expectations in his draft year season and really struggling to continue in his development since then. Not only is there a bit of a lack of soft skill and dynamism in his game, but he's been really marred with injuries. I've watched him live an absolute bunch while I was living in Ottawa and going to a bunch of the Ottawa 67s games. And when he's on his game, this is a really intriguing player who could become a middle six NHLer. He's violent, he's physical, he gets to the net front, he makes quick one-touch plays to get the puck to his teammates. He's a strong bumper and a strong net front presence and has a really hard shot as well. He can beat goaltenders even when they see the puck clearly from mid-range. This is a player that I think could still become a useful NHL piece, if not perhaps the caliber of player that you want to get at 10th overall. But injuries is the name of the game right now. He missed his entire season last year to injury, and he missed half the year before that. He's barely even hit 100 games played since being drafted all those years ago. And staying healthy is going to be the number one thing on his checklist in terms of continuing towards his NHL dreams. Now, transitioning over to the defensive core, we have some really interesting players. We've already talked about guys like Carter Yakemchuk and Gabriel Eliasson, but there's some other names in this equation that deserve mention. I think that Donovan Sabranga was a pretty acute target in that Alex DeBrincat deal. He doesn't have the highest of upsides, but he's an intelligent, physical, two-way defenseman who I think could be a number 4 guy if he hits his ceiling, and is still quite refined as well in his development and could be an NHLer as soon as this upcoming year. Jerian Donovan's been developing over in the OHL, going over to the Saginaw Spirit on their big Memorial Cup victory run. And he's an intelligent puck-moving defenseman as well, who knows when he has to throw the body. Hoyt Stanley is a player I like quite a bit in his draft year season when he was coming out of the BCHL with the Victoria Grizzlies. And this past year, he transferred over to the NCAA to play with Cornell University. And there he scored 2 goals and 10 points in 35 games. He's mobile. He's super rangy. He's 6'3", 201 pounds. And that underpinning of mobility is what allows him to be highly effective and create small advantages in all 3 zones of the ice. He can be really aggressive. He likes to take space and time away from his opponents and force them to make quick decisions under heavy pressure. I also quite like Matthew Andonovski and Thomas Hamara as potential bottom of the lineup defensive contributors in like the next 2 to 3 seasons at the NHL level too. In terms of goaltenders, we also have a couple interesting names. Leevi Merilainen would be one that stands out a decent amount. He's already gotten into a couple NHL games on top of playing quite a bit in the AHL and having a pretty solid OHL career as well, where he was playing with the Kingston Frontenacs as a teammate of Shane Wright's back a couple seasons ago. And beyond him, you also have a guy like Kevin Reidler, who is a goaltender I wanted to highlight in this episode. He's 6'6". He was drafted just 2 years ago in the 5th round by the Sens, and he's 203 pounds. He only turns 20 in September, and he's switching over from the USHL, where he played this past season with the Dubuque Fighting Saints, over to the NCAA with the University of Nebraska, Omaha. This past season, he played 39 games with Dubuque, where he logged a .902 save percentage, but it was in the playoffs that he was at his most valuable. In 11 playoff games, he had a 7-4 record, a .934 save percentage, which is superb at the USHL level, which is a league with typically high shooting percentages and lower save percentages, as well as just a 1.69 goals against average through 11 games played. This is a guy who has a lot of really big, raw physical tools. He's massive, he's athletic, and he could be an interesting longer-term project for the Senators. He's going to take some time for sure. He's still just 19 years of age, and he's not going to be fighting for an NHL roster spot anytime soon, but he's a prospect I think Sens fans should keep an eye on. But that wraps up the overall breakdown of this prospect pool. And I think that there are still a couple areas of need here. I mean, a lot of players have already made that leap up to the NHL level. The Sens find themselves in a bit of a weird purgatory area where their prospect pool isn't the deepest. A lot of their young guys are already in the NHL, and they're still struggling to win, even with added veteran help to support those young stars. So I think that adding a couple more high-end pieces to their prospect pool would really help their chances in continuing to build off of this core. Maybe also swapping some draft picks for prospects that are a little bit further along in their development paths and can maybe make that leap to the NHL. I think Rutger McGroarty would be a fantastic guy to target for the Senators. And I think adding a couple more top 6 forward projected players would be really valuable, as well as an intelligent, high-end right shot two-way defenseman. That is the main area of need I see with this team. And while they did address the right shot area of that need with their recent 7th overall selection in Carter Yakemchuk, he is not a two-way defenseman. He's very aggressive defensively, don't get me wrong. He's physical, he's violent, but he's not that solidifying force on the blue line. And I think going out to target that kind of player, whether it be at the draft or via trade, will be of the utmost importance for this Ottawa rebuild. I'm not quite sure what phase we are in at this stage. But yeah, I think overall the prospect pool that is currently in place gets a C grade. It is not as strong as the other teams that have been selecting in this draft range at the 2024 draft because they have been trying to contend as well. And a lot of their prospects have graduated. It's been very interesting to kind of watch the Ottawa Senators develop as an organization. And I really want them to take that leap. They have a soft spot in my heart, having lived there for almost 3 years and made that pilgrimage over to the CTC a couple times to catch Sens games and just struggle in the pain of getting out there past Canada to watch an NHL game. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this core is able to develop and how the prospect pool is able to influence that in the coming years. But let's wrap this episode up in the final segment by breaking down the 2024-2025 season projections and expectations and hopes for the young studs specifically. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. We are driven for the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all, it is to match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates extremely quickly. Ditch the busy work, use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, and so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality of matches compared to other job searching sites. One of the things that I have loved about Indeed in my personal use of it as an employee is how honest it is in wage and salary information. So many job sites hide that information from you, but Indeed makes a point of providing potential employees with that information, which immediately helps both employees and employers find those common matches. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide and use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, let's wrap things up here in the third segment. And I think that looking ahead to the 2024-25 season with the Ottawa Senators specifically is a fascinating little case study because there's a huge range of possible outcomes here. It's possible they end right back in the same position where they were this past season, where they have an underperforming lineup with really good players, whether they be young or veterans. Claude Giroux has been a fantastic addition to that lineup, adding so much versatility and intelligence and experience and leadership abilities to the equation, but they just haven't been quite able to make that next step in terms of becoming perennial contenders, even if it is just around the wild card spots. I think that adding Linus Ullmark in net is going to make a big difference. He is such a solidifying force, a player who won the Vezina Trophy just over a year ago. And I think that he's going to make a big difference to this lineup. Getting consistent goaltending makes such a big difference, not just in terms of the amount of pucks that get into your own net, but also the amount of calm that is just added into your lineup when you have such a solidifying force as your final line of defense, and allows players to kind of not hold their sticks too tightly when things aren't going right, and to just play their games and trust the process, trust their teammates to support them in each other's development and in order to win games on a consistent basis. I think the defensive core is going to be a real wild card this season with the Senators, especially with the trade having shipped out Jakob Chychrun. That is one very good top four NHL defenseman that is no longer in that lineup now, and they're going to be relying on other players to chip in to fill that void that is now being left. And while I think that trade kind of had to happen at some point, the value they got back was really disappointing. I think a lot of people in the league were surprised by how low that trade return ended up being. But I'm curious to see how the defensive core is able to adapt to this big change now heading into the new season, and how big of a difference that solid final line of defense in Linus Ullmark is going to make in also being able to elevate that defensive core in their overall games. I also think that adding some extra power play chemistry over time is going to be really important. We've seen flashes of an elite level Ottawa Senators power play over the past couple of seasons. When their offensive guns are firing at peak capacity, they are fantastic. It is so much fun to watch, and there's so much versatility and adaptability and dynamism in that forward core, whether it's coming from Tim Stützle or Drake Batherson or Brady Tkachuk as a fantastic net front presence. on the power play. There's so many weapons to look to. And Claude Giroux is still one of the better power play creators in the NHL today. In terms of looking ahead to the season and the production that young players could be bringing to the equations, I'd want to start off with the big name here in Tim Stützle. I'm looking for a big bounce back season for this player. He just hit 70 points this past season, and I think that he could get back to that 90-point range this upcoming year. He's so skilled. He's so intelligent. He's dynamic. He's constantly trying things. He's creative with the puck on his stick, and I think that hitting that 30 goal and 60 assist plateau is entirely possible yet again. Shane Pinto might have a full season of being able to actually contribute to the lineup this next season. And I think that if he's able to hit that 25 goal and 55 point plateau, that he'll be able to make a really big difference inside Ottawa's top six. Josh Norris will be hoping for a healthy season this year. And if he's healthy, he's a fantastic goal threat. I think he could hit that 30 goal plateau. And if he's able to even exceed the 55 points that I'm kind of projecting for him this season, there's a lot to be excited for in terms of the offensive production coming out of Ottawa this season. Jake Sanderson will continue his development as a premier blue liner in the NHL this year, and I think he could be hitting that 50-point plateau as well. He's a fantastic player, locked up to a really nice contract for 8 seasons at $8 million, and he could even chip in with another 15 goals from the blue line as well. He'll be getting more reps on the power play. I could imagine a continued swing in overall workload on the man advantage from Thomas Chabot to Jake Sanderson, and kind of handing that baton over to the next younger generation of high-end left shot defensemen in that organization. Last but not least, I still want to give a shout out to Ridley Gregg, one of the more likable players in terms of or unlikable, depending what you look for in players. If you're playing against them, you really hate it. But if you're a neutral fan tuning into a game like I often am with the Senators, I love watching this kid play. He is so feisty. He's so intense. He's really speedy and physical and gritty. And I think he could score 20 goals and 40 points this season while also adding a bunch of defensive and off-puck value, creating a bunch of havoc and chaos, and also time and space for his teammates to create special things with the pucks on their sticks. But that wraps up this overall breakdown of the 2024-2025 season projections. If you're watching on YouTube, please let us know in the comments below which players you think are going to be taking massive steps for the Sens this upcoming season, which prospects in their prospect pool you are most excited to keep tracking, and which ones you think that could even have top line or top pairing NHL upside at the end of the day, and what your thoughts were on their overall strategy at the 2024 draft. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. If you're listening over on your favorite podcasting platform, please make us your first listen of the day. It is always really appreciated. We are so very appreciative of the support that our everydayers give us week in, week out. And for your second listen of the day, go and check out Locked On Sports Today, a 24-hour-a-day news stream that presents all the sporting news you could possibly want to have access to. I'm Sebastian High, Director of European Scouting over at Dauber Prospects, typically joined by Hattie Kalakesh, Director of North American Scouting at Dauber Prospects. But that wraps up our show for today. Thank you so much for listening in, and we hope that you tune back in very shortly.